The winter wind cut through the Montana mountains like a blade, and Marcus Thornton could feel death riding on its back. He stumbled through the knee-deep snow, his fever burning so hot that the frozen world around him seemed to shimmer and dance. 3 days ago, he'd caught pneumonia while checking his fences during the first blizzard. 3 days of trying to make it back to his cabin, each step heavier than the last. He was a big man, 6'5", with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown calf, but right now, Marcus felt as weak as a newborn lamb. His dark hair was matted with sweat despite the cold, and his green eyes, usually sharp and alert, could barely focus on the path ahead. Just a little further. His cabin was close now. He could see the dark outline of it through the trees. If he could just make it inside, get to his bed, maybe the fever would break. Maybe he wouldn't die alone in this godforsaken wilderness after all. That's when he heard it. A small sound, almost lost in the howling wind. A whimper, a child's cry. Marcus stopped, swaying on his feet. He must be hallucinating. There were no children out here. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles away. But the sound came again, and this time he was sure. Someone was crying. He turned, his vision blurring, and saw them. 3 small figures huddled behind a fallen log, barely visible in their tattered, snow-covered clothes. Children. Dear God, there were children out here in the storm. The fever made his thoughts slow and thick, but his body moved on instinct. He lurched toward them, falling to his knees in the snow. 2 girls and a boy he could see now. The oldest couldn't be more than 9. They stared at him with huge, terrified eyes. It's all right, Marcus managed to say, his voice a rough rasp. I won't hurt you. The oldest girl, with tangled brown hair and a thin face that had seen too much suffering, clutched the 2 younger ones closer. Please, mister, we're so cold. We saw smoke from your chimney yesterday. We've been trying to reach it. Yesterday. They'd been out here since yesterday. Marcus's heart clenched. He could barely stand himself, but he couldn't leave them. He'd die before he left children in the snow. Come, he said, reaching out one large, trembling hand. My cabin. Not far. The girl hesitated, then looked at the 2 little ones shivering against her. The boy, maybe 5 years old, had lips turning blue. The smallest girl, no more than 3, wasn't even crying anymore. Just staring with glassy eyes. They were dying. She knew it. So did Marcus. We'll follow you, she whispered. Marcus tried to stand and nearly fell. His legs wouldn't hold him anymore. The fever was winning, but those children needed him. He thought of his own. Your daughter, lost to scarlet fever 3 years ago. She'd been 7, the same age as this brave little girl trying to save her siblings. Hold on to my coat, he said. All of you. Don't let go. They moved like a wounded animal through the snow, Marcus crawling on hands and knees when walking became impossible, the children clinging to him like burrs. Every breath was agony, every movement sent waves of pain and dizziness through him. But he kept moving. The cabin door seemed 100 miles away, then 50. Then 20. His hand touched the wooden step, and relief flooded through him so intensely he nearly wept. He pushed the door open and collapsed onto the floor just inside, the children tumbling in after him. For a moment, he just lay there, unable to move. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and the cabin was cold, but it was shelter. It was safety. The oldest girl crawled over to him. Mister, are you dead? Marcus forced his eyes open. Not yet, he whispered. Fire. Need to build up the fire. But he couldn't move. His body had given everything it had just getting them here. He watched helplessly as the little girl looked around the cabin, her young face tight with fear. She didn't know what to do. She was just a child herself. What's your name? Marcus asked, his words slurring. Sarah, she said. That's Tommy, and that's Emma. Sarah. Marcus focused everything he had on speaking clearly. Wood! By the fireplace. Add logs to the fire. Can you do that? She nodded and scrambled to the hearth. Her hands shook as she picked up a log, nearly too heavy for her to lift, and placed it on the dying embers. Then another. Marcus talked her through it, each word an effort, until flames began to catch and grow. Good girl, he breathed. Now, blankets. On the bed. Bring them. Sarah dragged the heavy quilts from his bed, covering Tommy and Emma first. They'd stopped shivering now, which Marcus knew was a bad sign. Hypothermia. They needed to warm up slowly, carefully. Take off their wet clothes, he instructed. Wrap them in the blankets. skin to skin. It's the fastest way to warm them. Sarah worked with the desperate efficiency of a child who'd already lost too much. As she tended to the little ones, Marcus forced himself to crawl closer to the fire. His own clothes were soaked through, his body shaking with fever and cold. He needed to stay conscious. These children needed him. "Sarah," he said, "can you read?" She nodded. "In the kitchen, cabinet above the basin, brown bottle. Says laudanum on it. Can you find it?" The girl ran to the kitchen and returned with the bottle. Marcus had bought it 6 months ago when he'd broken his ribs. He'd hardly touched it, hating the way it made. His mind foggy, but right now he needed the pain to stop long enough to think. "2 drops, he said. "In water, for me." She brought him the mixture, and he drank it down. The medicine began to work quickly, dulling the sharp edges of his pain. His mind cleared just enough. "Now," he said, "tell me what happened. Why are you out here alone?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Our ma and pa, they got sick 2 weeks ago. The fever. They died 3 days apart. The town wanted to split us up, send us to different families. I heard them talking. They said nobody would take all 3 of us. Tommy's too young, and Emma, they said she's simple-minded because she don't talk much." Marcus's heart broke. He knew small towns, knew how quickly people made judgments about children, especially poor ones. "So you ran," he said. "I had to keep us together," Sarah said fiercely. "We're family. Ma made me promise before she died. She said, 'Sarah, you keep your brother and sister together no matter what.' You did good," Marcus said. "You kept them alive. You found help." "But you're sick too," Sarah said, and now the tears fell. "Everybody's always sick or dying. I don't know what to do." Marcus looked at this 9-year-old girl who'd lost her parents, fled into a Montana winter, and somehow kept 2 small children alive for days in the wilderness. She was braver than most men he knew. "You're going to help me get well," he said. "And I'm going to help you, all of you. But first, we need to get through tonight." He talked her through making soup from the supplies in his kitchen. His hands were too unsteady to do it himself, but Sarah was quick and smart. She boiled water, added dried beef and vegetables, and brought him a bowl. He managed a few sips before the nausea hit, but it was something. The children ate hungrily, and color began to return to Tommy's and Emma's faces. Sarah wrapped them in more blankets and laid them near the fire, then turned back to Marcus. "You need to get out of those wet clothes too," she said with the bossy authority of a big sister. "You'll catch your death." In any other circumstance, Marcus might have laughed, but the girl was right. He was too weak to undress himself, though. Sarah, with the practical wisdom of a child who'd nursed her dying parents, brought him dry long johns and a blanket, then turned her back, while he struggled out of his frozen clothes. By the time he was dry and wrapped in blankets, the laudanum and fever were pulling him under. His last conscious thought was worry for the children. If he died in the night, what would happen to them? But when he woke, grey dawn light was filtering through the window, and he was still alive. More than that, the fever had broken. He was weak as a kitten, soaked in sweat, but his mind was clear. The children were asleep in a pile near the fire, like puppies seeking warmth. Sarah had one arm around each of the little ones, even in sleep, protecting them. Something in Marcus's chest, something he'd thought died with his daughter, stirred back to life. He spent the next 3 days recovering, and in that time he learned more about the children. Tommy was 5. With sandy hair and his father's dimples. He talked constantly once he felt safe, asking 100 questions about everything in the cabin. Emma was 3.5, with dark curls and solemn grey eyes. She didn't talk much, but she wasn't simple-minded. She was just quiet, thoughtful in a way that seemed old for her age. And Sarah was the glue holding them together. She cooked the simple meals Marcus instructed her to make, kept the fire going, and mothered her siblings with fierce devotion. But in quiet moments, Marcus caught her staring out the window with haunted eyes, the weight of the world on her small shoulders. On the 4th day, Marcus was strong enough to stand. He made a proper breakfast, eggs and bacon and biscuits, and the children ate like they'd never seen food before. "How long since you had a real meal?" he asked. "Ma couldn't afford much food when she was sick," Sarah said quietly. "We had mostly bread and thin soup for weeks." Marcus felt anger burn in his chest. While these children had been starving, the good people of whatever town they'd come from had been making plans to split them up. To hell with that. "What town did you come from?" he asked. "Cedar Falls," Sarah said. "It's 20 miles east," Marcus finished. "I know it. He'd been there exactly twice in the 3 years he'd lived in Montana. Both times, he'd been treated like something dirty the wind blew in. Big, scarred, silent Marcus Thornton, who lived alone in the mountains and never came to church. They'd made their opinions clear. "We can't go back," Sarah said, panic in her voice. "Please, mister, they'll separate us. I know they will." Marcus looked at the three small faces staring at him with desperate hope. He thought about his daughter, about the wife he'd lost in childbirth 2 years before his daughter died. He thought about the 5 years he'd spent alone in this cabin, punishing himself for not being able to save them, for being too big and clumsy to help during the difficult birth, for not getting the doctor fast enough when his daughter's fever spiked. He thought about how empty this cabin had been, how silent, how dead. And then he thought about Tommy's constant questions, Emma's rare smiles, and Sarah's fierce protectiveness. He thought about the sound of children's laughter, something he'd thought he'd never hear again. "You're not going back to Cedar Falls," he said. "You're staying here with me." Sarah's eyes went wide. You mean it?" "I mean it," Marcus said. "If you'll have me. I'm not much for talking, and this cabin's small and winters are hard up here, but you'll be together. You'll be a family." Sarah burst into tears. Tommy whooped and ran to hug Marcus's legs. Even Emma smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. Marcus had no idea what he'd just committed to. He was a solitary man, used to silence and his own company. He didn't know the first thing about raising children, especially not a grieving 9-year-old girl, an energetic 5-year-old boy, and a quiet 3-year-old who needed patience and understanding. But over the next weeks, they figured it out together. Marcus taught Sarah to read better, using the few books he had. Tommy followed him everywhere, learning to care for the chickens and feed the horses. Emma attached herself to Marcus like a shadow, rarely speaking, but always nearby, her small hand often finding his large, calloused one. The cabin that had been so silent filled with noise. Tommy's endless questions, Sarah reading aloud in the evenings, Emma's rare but precious words, arguments over chores, laughter over shared jokes, the sounds of life. Marcus built another room onto the cabin, the girls sharing one bed and Tommy getting a small cot. He bought material in the next town over, and Sarah sewed curtains. They planted a bigger garden in the spring. They became, slowly but surely, a family, but Marcus knew it couldn't last forever. Legally, these children didn't belong to him. Someone in Cedar Falls had to be wondering what happened to the 3 orphans who disappeared, and while he loved them fiercely now, loved them with the same protective intensity he'd felt for his own daughter, he had no legal right to keep them. The reckoning came in early summer. Marcus had taken Sarah to the town of Silver Creek, 15 miles west of his cabin, to buy supplies. They were loading flour and sugar into the wagon when he heard a woman's sharp voice. "Sarah Patterson? Sarah? Is that you?" Marcus turned to see a thin woman in an expensive dress, her face pinched with disapproval. Sarah went pale. "Mrs. Blackwood," she whispered. "Young lady, where have you been? The whole town has been searching for you children. We thought you died in the snow." The woman's eyes moved to Marcus, and her expression hardened. "Who is this man? What are you doing with him?" "He saved us," Sarah said, moving closer to Marcus. "He took us in." Mrs. Blackwood's lips thinned. "I see. And you've been living with this stranger for 6 months, unchaperoned." The implication was clear and vile. Marcus felt rage build in his chest, but Sarah spoke first. "He's been taking care of us," she said firmly. "He fed us and kept us warm and treated us like family. He's been better to us than anyone in Cedar Falls ever was." "That's quite enough," Mrs. Blackwood snapped. "You're coming back with me right now. This is highly inappropriate. A man alone with children, especially a girl your age. I don't know what people will say." "No," Sarah said. "I beg your pardon?" "No," Sarah repeated louder. "We're not going back. You wanted to separate us. You were going to send Emma away because you said she was touched in the head. You were going to make Tommy work as a stable boy for the Hendersons. And you were going to send me to be a servant for Reverend Walsh's wife." Mrs. Blackwood's face flushed. "Those were good opportunities. Those were ways to get rid of poor orphans you didn't want to deal with," Sarah said. "At least be honest about it." Marcus put a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I'll handle this," he said quietly. He turned to Mrs. Blackwood. "The children are in my care now. You have no legal right to them," Mrs. Blackwood said. "I'm taking them back to Cedar Falls today." "No," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "You're not. Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating facts. Those children came to me half frozen and starving. I took them in. I've been caring for them for 6 months. They're healthy and happy and learning, and they're staying with me. The law says orphans can be placed with anyone willing to care for them," Marcus interrupted. "I'm willing, I'm able. I have a home, land, and means. Unless you can show I've harmed them in any way, you have no grounds to remove them from my custody." Mrs. Blackwood sputtered. "You're unmarried. It's inappropriate for a single man to raise children." "Then I'll get married," Marcus said. The words were out before he'd thought them through. Sarah looked up at him in shock. Mrs. Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "Oh, really?" she said. "And who exactly would marry a mountain hermit with 3 orphans?" It was a good question. Marcus had no answer. He'd spoken from desperation, not sense. What woman would want to marry a man she barely knew and take on 3 grieving children? "That's what I thought," Mrs. Blackwood said triumphantly. "Now, Sarah, gather your things. We're leaving." "No!" The shout came from behind them. Marcus turned to see a woman running across the street toward them. She was young, maybe 25, with auburn hair coming loose from its pins and flour dusting her apron. Her face was flushed and determined. "Mr. Thornton isn't unmarried," the woman said breathlessly. "He's married to me." Marcus stared at her. He'd never seen this woman before in his life. Mrs. Blackwood looked equally shocked. "You married to him? Since when?" Since March," the woman said, glancing at Marcus with pleading green eyes. "We married in Silver Creek. I've been living at his cabin with him and the children since then. Perfectly respectable, a proper family." "I don't believe you," Mrs. Blackwood said flatly. "Then go to the county clerk's office and check the marriage records," the woman said, with more confidence than Marcus thought the situation warranted. "You'll find everything in order." This was a lie, a complete fabrication, but Mrs. Blackwood was already looking uncertain. The woman's conviction was impressive. "Sarah," Mrs. Blackwood said sharply, "is this woman your stepmother?" Sarah looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the mysterious woman who was claiming to be his wife. The woman gave a tiny, desperate nod. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "This is Mrs. Thornton. She's been wonderful to us." Mrs. Blackwood stared at them all for a long moment. Finally, she sniffed. "Well, I suppose if you're properly married and the children are being cared for, but I'll be checking those records. Mark my words. And if I find out this is some sort of arrangement, I'll have the law on you so fast. The records will be in order," the woman said calmly. "Good day, Mrs. Blackwood." The older woman huffed and walked away, shooting suspicious glances over her shoulder. The moment she was out of earshot, Marcus turned to his supposed wife. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman's false confidence crumbled. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and very scared. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm Grace Sullivan. I work at the bakery there." She gestured to the shop across the street. "I was in the window when I heard that awful woman talking about taking the children. I couldn't let that happen, so I lied." "You lied about being married to me," Marcus said slowly. "Yes," Grace said miserably. "And now we're both in trouble because she's going to check those records and find out the truth. And then she'll take the children for sure and probably have you arrested and—" "Grace!" Marcus interrupted her spiraling panic. "Breathe." She took a shaky breath. Up close, Marcus could see that she was pretty in a quiet way. Soft brown eyes, a scatter of freckles across her nose. Her hands were flour-dusted and work-roughened. A working woman, not a lady. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "You don't know me. You don't know these children." Grace looked at Sarah, who was watching them with wide eyes. "I know what it's like to be an orphan," she said softly. "I know what it's like to be split from your family. I was separated from my brother when our parents died. I was 8. I never saw him again. I couldn't watch it happen to someone else." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This woman had risked everything, her reputation, her safety, for children she'd never met, because she knew their pain. "Well," he said slowly, "I suppose we have 2 choices. We can tell Mrs. Blackwood the truth, and she'll take the children." "No," Sarah said immediately. "Or," Marcus continued, looking at Grace, "we can make your lie the truth." Grace's eyes went wide. You mean actually get married?" "You offered," Marcus pointed out. "And I need a wife if I'm going to keep these children. You clearly care about what happens to them. So unless you have someone else waiting for you—" "No," Grace said quietly. "There's no one. But Mr. Thornton, you don't know anything about me. I know you're brave enough to lie to a woman like Mrs. Blackwood to protect 3 orphans. Marcus said. "I know you work hard for a living, and I know you understand loss. That's more than most marriages start with." It was insane, completely insane. But Grace was looking at Sarah's hopeful face, at Marcus's steady gaze, and thinking about the tiny room behind the bakery where she slept, the endless days of kneading dough for pennies, the loneliness that had been her companion since her brother was taken away 20 years ago. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "A real marriage," Marcus said. "You'd come live at the cabin, help with the children. We'd be partners in raising them." "And the rest of it?" Grace asked, her cheeks flushing. "The marital aspects?" Marcus felt his own face heat. "We'd take that slow. Get to know each other first. I won't force anything on you. You have my word." Grace studied him. He was a big man, intimidating in his size and silence. But his eyes were kind, and Sarah clearly trusted him. The little girl had moved to stand next to him, her hand, finding his like it was the most natural thing in the world. "If I say yes," Grace said slowly, "I have conditions." "Name them." "I want to be a real mother to these children, not just a housekeeper. I want to have a say in how they're raised." "Agreed," Marcus said without hesitation. "And I want the truth between us. Always. No secrets, no lies beyond the one we've already told." "Agreed. And if this doesn't work, if we find we can't bear each other, I want your word that you'll help me find a way to leave safely, that you won't trap me." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I would never trap you. You have my word, though I'll point out that you'll be trapping yourself too. If you marry me, you're taking on 3 children who've already lost too much." Grace looked at Sarah again. "What do you think?" she asked the girl. "Would you want me as your stepmother?" Sarah looked between Grace and Marcus. "Are you kind?" she asked Grace. "I try to be," Grace said. "Can you cook?" Grace laughed despite herself. "Yes, very well, actually." "Then I think you should marry Mr. Thornton," Sarah said seriously. "He's a good man, but he's a terrible cook, and Tommy needs a mother to answer all his questions, because Mr. Thornton runs out of words sometimes." Marcus couldn't argue with that. He did run out of words, especially when Tommy asked why the sky was blue for the 7th time in a day. "So?" Marcus asked Grace. "Will you marry me?" Grace took a deep breath. This was madness. Marrying a stranger to save 3 children she didn't know, but maybe madness was what she needed. Maybe this was God's strange way of giving her the family she'd lost so long ago. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." They were married that afternoon by the justice of the peace in Silver Creek. Sarah stood witness, solemn and proud. Marcus held Grace's hand, his grip gentle despite his size. Grace's hand trembled in his, but she spoke her vows clearly. When the justice pronounced them man and wife, Marcus bent down and placed the softest, briefest kiss on Grace's lips. It was so quick she barely felt it, but her face flamed anyway. "Thank you," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear, "for saving them." They rode back to the cabin as the sun was setting, Grace sitting beside Marcus on the wagon bench, Sarah in the back with the supplies. Grace tried not to think about what she'd just done. Tried not to panic about the fact that she was now married to a man she'd met 4 hours ago. When they arrived at the cabin, Tommy and Emma came running out, and Grace got her first good look at the younger children. Tommy was all energy and grins, while Emma hung back watching Grace with serious eyes. "Who's that?" Tommy asked. "This is Grace," Marcus said. "So she's your new mother." Emma's eyes went very wide. Tommy looked skeptical. "How can she be our mother? Our mother died." "I know," Grace said, kneeling down to Tommy's level. "I'm not trying to replace your mama, but I'm married to Mr. Thornton now, which means I'm your stepmother, and I hope very much that we can be friends." Tommy considered this. "Can you make cookies?" "Yes," Grace said. "Good cookies, not the hard ones that hurt your teeth. Soft cookies with chocolate if you have it," Grace promised. Tommy's face lit up. "You can stay." Emma still watched silently. Grace didn't push her. She'd been a quiet child herself once, after her parents died. Sometimes silence was the only safe place. Marcus showed Grace around the cabin. It was small, but well-built, clean and tidy in a masculine way. The addition he'd built for the children was rough but sturdy. The whole place spoke of a man who cared for what was his. "You can have the main bedroom," Marcus said. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." Grace turned to him. "We're married now," she said. "People will think it's strange if you sleep separately." "No one's going to come check," Marcus said. "Sarah will notice. Tommy will ask questions." Grace took a breath. The bed's big enough. We can share it, with a bundling board between us if you like. That's traditional for new marriages." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "You're sure?" "I'm sure we need to make this look real," Grace said, "for the children's sake." That night, after the children were asleep, Grace and Marcus lay in bed with a wall of pillows between them. The cabin was dark and quiet, except for the soft breathing of the children in the next room. "Marcus," Grace whispered. "Yeah? Tell me about yourself. If we're going to be married, I should know more than your name." So, in the darkness, Marcus told her, about his first wife, dead in childbirth, about his daughter, lost to fever, about the 5 years he'd spent alone, punishing himself, until 3 half-frozen orphans stumbled into his life and reminded him what it meant to be alive. When he finished, Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she told him her story, about losing her parents at 8, about being separated from her younger brother, sent to different families, about working since she was 9 years old, first as a servant, then learning to bake, about the loneliness that had been her constant companion. "I used to dream about having a family again," she whispered. "A real family. I never thought it would happen like this." "Regrets?" Marcus asked. "No," Grace said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Not yet, anyway. Ask me again in a month." Marcus chuckled, a low rumble in the darkness. "Fair enough." The first weeks were an adjustment. Grace had never run a household before, and Marcus had his own routines. They clashed over small things. Grace thought Marcus was too lenient with the children. Marcus thought Grace worried too much about manners and cleanliness. The first real argument came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after their wedding. Grace had asked Tommy 5 times to wash his hands before breakfast. Each time, the boy had promised he would and then forgotten, running off to check on the chickens or examine an interesting rock. When he finally sat down at the table with dirt-caked fingers, Grace had had enough. "Thomas Patterson, you will not eat until those hands are clean," she said firmly. Tommy's lower lip jutted out. "Mr. Thornton never made me wash before." Grace looked at Marcus, who was standing by the stove, clearly uncomfortable with being brought into the dispute. Is that true?" Marcus shifted his weight. "Well, I guess I didn't always check." "Didn't always check?" Grace's voice rose slightly. "Marcus, the boy's hands are black with dirt. He could get sick." "A little dirt never hurt anybody," Marcus said, though his tone was conciliatory. "I grew up eating with dirty hands. Turned out fine." "You also grew up without a mother to teach you better," Grace said, and immediately regretted it when she saw Marcus's face close off. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's fine," Marcus said, his voice flat. "You're right. I don't know how to do this properly." He looked at Tommy. "Go wash your hands, son." The rest of breakfast was strained. Sarah kept her eyes on her plate, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Emma had stopped eating entirely, her small face anxious. Tommy washed his hands with exaggerated vigor, making sure Grace saw every scrub. After the children went outside to play, Grace and Marcus stood in awkward silence, clearing the dishes. "I overstepped," Grace said quietly. "You've been caring for them for 6 months. You know what you're doing." "No," Marcus said. "You were right. I've been letting things slide because I didn't want to be too strict. Didn't want them to feel like I was—" He trailed off. "Like you were what?" Grace asked gently. Marcus set down the plate he was holding. "My father was a hard man. Quick with his fists, quicker with his belt. I swore I'd never be like him. So I went the other way. Too soft, maybe." Grace's heart ached for him. She stepped closer, close enough to touch his arm. "There's a middle ground," she said, "between cruel and indulgent. We'll find it together." Marcus looked down at her, and for the first time since their wedding, she saw real vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm afraid of getting it wrong," he admitted. "They've already lost so much." "What, if I fail them?" "You won't," Grace said with certainty. "You love them. That's what matters most. The rest we can figure out." He covered her hand with his, warm and rough. We, Grace confirmed. "That's what partners do." After that, they made it a point to discuss decisions about the children together. Grace learned to ask, rather than dictate. Marcus learned that structure and rules weren't cruelty, but kindness in another form. But they learned to compromise in other ways too. Grace learned that Marcus's silence didn't mean disapproval, just that he was a man of few words, who thought carefully before speaking. Marcus learned that Grace's worry came from love, from the fear of losing another family. She learned that he liked his coffee black and bitter, that he whistled tunelessly while he worked, that he had nightmares sometimes about his daughter's death. He learned that she hummed while she baked, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, that she'd never learned to swim because her family had been too poor for such luxuries. And slowly, carefully, they became friends. Marcus taught Grace to ride a horse, his big hands steadying her as she learned to balance. Grace taught Marcus to make proper bread, laughing when his massive hands kneaded the dough too hard. They worked side by side in the garden, their comfortable silence broken only by Tommy's constant questions and Sarah's reading aloud. The riding lessons were Grace's favorite part of the day. Marcus had a gentle mare named Daisy that he said would be perfect for a beginner. The first time he lifted Grace onto the saddle, his hands spanning her waist completely, Grace felt her breath catch. He was so strong, lifting her like she weighed nothing, but so careful not to hold her too tightly. "Don't be afraid," Marcus said, keeping one hand on Daisy's bridle and the other on Grace's leg, steadying her. "I won't let you fall." "I'm not afraid," Grace said, and realized it was true. She trusted him completely. Over the next weeks, Marcus taught her to sit properly, to guide the mare with gentle pressure, to move with the horse's rhythm instead of against it. He walked beside her for hours, patient and encouraging, never once making her feel foolish for her mistakes. One afternoon, after she'd managed to trot all the way around the pasture without his help, Grace pulled Daisy to a stop beside Marcus. Her face was flushed with exhilaration, her hair coming loose from its pins. "Did you see?" she asked breathlessly. "I did it!" Marcus looked up at her, and the expression on his face made her heart skip. It was tender and proud, and something deeper, something that made her feel warm all over. "You did perfect," he said, his voice rough. "You're a natural." "I had a good teacher," Grace said softly. Their eyes held, and the moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feeling. Marcus reached up, and for a breathless second Grace thought he might pull her down from the saddle and kiss her, but instead he simply helped her dismount, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. In turn, Grace taught Marcus the art of bread making. He'd been surviving on hardtack and poorly risen attempts, and Grace was determined to teach him properly. The first few attempts were disasters. Marcus's hands, so capable with an axe or a rope, seemed too large and clumsy for the delicate work of kneading. "You're being too aggressive," Grace said, laughing as he pounded the dough. "You're beating it, not kneading it. How else am I supposed to make it smooth?" Marcus asked, frustrated. Grace stepped closer and covered his hands with hers, guiding his movements. "Gentle, push and fold, like this. Feel the difference?" Marcus had stopped breathing, with Grace pressed against his back, her small hands on his, showing him the rhythm. All he could feel was her, the warmth of her body, the scent of her hair, faintly floral, the soft sound of her breathing. "Marcus," Grace said, "are you listening?" "Yeah," he managed. "Gentle. I got it." Grace stepped back, and Marcus immediately missed her warmth. But he'd learned the lesson. From then on, his bread improved dramatically, though he secretly thought it had more to do with the memory of Grace's hands on his than any actual skill. They worked side by side, in the garden too, planting seeds for the coming harvest. Grace had never had a garden before, and she delighted in everything: the feel of soil between her fingers, the hope in each tiny seed, the promise of growth and life. Marcus showed her how to make straight rows, how to space the seeds properly, how to water without flooding. He worked shirtless in the heat, and Grace tried not to stare at the play of muscles across his back and shoulders. Tried and failed. "See something you like?" Marcus asked, his tone teasing. Grace felt her face flame. "You have a scar on your shoulder blade. I was wondering how you got it." Marcus reached back and touched the old wound. "Bull got me when I was 19. Thought I was tougher than I was. Nearly died from the infection." "Who took care of you?" Grace asked. "My wife," Marcus said quietly. "We'd only been married a few months. She nursed me through the fever, changed the dressings even when I was delirious and fighting her. She saved my life." Grace heard the love in his voice, even after all these years, and felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy. She had no right to be jealous of a dead woman, but she wanted Marcus to speak about her with that same tenderness someday. "She must have loved you very much," Grace said. "She did," Marcus agreed, and I loved her. But Grace, he turned to face her fully. That was a different life, a different me. I'll always carry her memory, but I'm not still in love with a ghost. I need you to know that. Grace's heart pounded. Why do you need me to know that? Marcus took a step closer, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. Soil dusted his chest and arms. Sweat gleamed on his skin. He'd never looked more alive, more real. Because I'm starting to have feelings for you, he said. Real feelings. And I don't want you to think you're competing with someone who's been dead for 5 years. You're not. He struggled for words. You're Grace. Just Grace. And that's more than enough. Grace couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, so instead she reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. I have feelings for you too, she whispered. I think I have since the day we married, maybe even before, when I saw you standing there defending those children, willing to fight the whole world to keep them safe. I thought I'd never met anyone so good. I'm not good, Marcus said. I'm just a man trying his best. That's what makes you good, Grace said. They stood there in the garden, covered in dirt, surrounded by the promise of growing things, and Marcus bent his head to kiss her forehead. It was chaste, gentle, nothing like the passionate kiss she'd started to dream about, but it was a promise, a statement of intent, and it made Grace's heart soar. Emma, quiet Emma, was the one who showed Grace that she was becoming part of the family. One morning, 6 weeks after the wedding, Emma climbed into Grace's lap while she was sewing and just sat there, her small body relaxed and trusting. Grace had to blink back tears. The moment was made. Even more precious, because Emma so rarely sought physical affection. She would hold Marcus's hand, and sometimes she would lean against Sarah, but mostly she kept to herself, watching the world with those serious grey eyes. Emma, Grace said softly, not wanting to break the spell. Is everything all right? Emma didn't answer right away. She just sat there, her small hands folded in her lap, her dark curls tickling Grace's chin. Finally, she spoke in her quiet, careful voice. You smell nice, Emma said. Like cinnamon and sunshine. Grace's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Thank you, sweetheart. That's a beautiful thing to say. Mama used to smell like soap, Emma continued. Plain soap. We couldn't afford the fancy kind. But she would sing while she washed, and that made it special. This was the most Grace had ever heard Emma speak at once. She held very still, afraid any movement might make the little girl retreat back into her silence. What did your mama sing? Grace asked. Emma hummed a few bars of a melody, soft and sweet. It was a lullaby, Grace realized, one she'd heard before, though she couldn't remember where. That's lovely, Grace said. Would you teach it to me? And so Emma did, her small voice growing stronger as she sang. When she finished, she turned in Grace's lap to look up at her. You're not trying to be Mama, Emma said. It wasn't a question, but Grace answered anyway. No, she said. I could never be your mama. She was special and irreplaceable, and she loved you very much. But I can be Grace, and I love you too, in my own way. Emma studied her for a long moment. That's okay, she finally said. I like you being Grace. Then she climbed out of Grace's lap and went to play, as if she hadn't just given Grace one of the most precious gifts of her life. Marcus saw it from across the room. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, affection, the beginning of something deeper. That evening, after the children were asleep, Marcus found Grace sitting on the porch, looking up at the stars. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Emma talked to you today, he said. She did? Grace confirmed. More than I've ever heard her speak. She doesn't trust easily, Marcus said. When she and her siblings first came here, she didn't say a word for 3 weeks, not one. I thought maybe the townspeople were right, that she was simple-minded. But then one night, I heard her talking to Tommy, telling him a story about a brave little rabbit who outsmarted a fox. Her voice was so clear, so clever. I realized she just needed to feel safe enough to share it. She's not simple-minded at all, Grace said. She's extraordinarily bright. She notices things other people miss, the way the light changes in the afternoon, how the chickens have different personalities, the exact way each of us takes our coffee. Grace smiled. She told me today that I smell like cinnamon and sunshine. Marcus laughed. A warm, genuine sound. That's Emma. She sees the world differently than most. It's a gift. It is, Grace agreed. She hesitated, then added, "She talked about her mother today, about missing her." "That's good," Marcus said. "Sarah tries to be strong and never talks about the pain. Tommy's too young to really understand what he lost. But Emma feels everything deeply. If she's talking about it, that means she's healing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, an owl hooting in the distance, the soft rustle of wind through the pines, the creek babbling somewhere below the cabin. "Grace," Marcus said eventually. "Yes? Thank you for being patient with them, for not trying to replace what they lost, for just being you." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "They make it easy," she said. "They're wonderful children. You did a beautiful job with them before I ever came along." "We're doing a beautiful job with them," Marcus corrected. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. Together. Grace looked down at their joined hands, then up at Marcus's face, shadowed in the starlight. His green eyes were dark but warm, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Marcus," she whispered. But before she could finish, a crash came from inside the cabin, followed by Tommy's voice calling out, "I just wanted water. The cup slipped. I'm sorry." They both jumped up and rushed inside to find Tommy standing in a puddle of water and broken ceramic, looking terrified that he'd be in trouble. "It's all right," Grace said immediately, picking her way carefully through the shards. "Accidents happen. Let's get you out of this puddle before you cut your feet." She lifted Tommy and carried him to his bed while Marcus cleaned up the mess. By the time everything was settled and Tommy had been given water in an unbreakable tin cup, the moment on the porch had passed. But as Grace and Marcus returned to their bedroom, she felt Marcus's hand find hers in the darkness. He gave it a gentle squeeze, and she squeezed back. Words could wait. They had time. That night, when they lay in bed with the wall of pillows between them, Marcus spoke into the darkness. "Grace." "Yes?" "I think we could remove some of these pillows, if you wanted." Grace's heart fluttered. They'd been married for 6 weeks now, and each night the wall of pillows had felt more and more like a barrier to something they both wanted, but were afraid to name. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "However many you're comfortable with." Grace sat up and looked at the pillow wall between them. There were 6 pillows total, carefully arranged to create a complete barrier. She removed 2 from the middle, creating a small gap. It wasn't much, but it meant something. They were closer now, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his large body, could hear his breathing shift and deepen. "Marcus?" she whispered. "Yeah? Thank you for being patient with me. I know we're married and I know you have needs, but you've never made me feel pressured or—" "Grace," Marcus interrupted gently. "Stop. I told you on our wedding day that we'd take this at your pace, and I meant it. I'm not some brute who thinks a marriage certificate gives me the right to demand anything from you. It'll be because we both want it, because it means something." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "You're such a good man," she said. "I'm just trying to be worthy of you," Marcus said. Through the gap in the pillows, Grace could see his silhouette in the moonlight streaming through the window, big and solid and safe. She wanted to reach through that gap, to touch him, to close the distance between them, but she wasn't quite ready. Not yet. "Good night, Marcus," she said. "Good night, Grace," he replied, and then, so softly she almost missed it, "Sleep well, my wife, my wife." The words sent warmth flooding through her. She fell asleep with a smile on her face. The next 2 weeks saw the gradual reduction of the pillow wall. Grace removed 1 more pillow the following week, then another. Each removal felt significant, like a declaration of trust and growing affection. By the end of July, there were only 2 pillows left between them. They fell into a comfortable rhythm. Grace would wake first and slip out of bed carefully, not wanting to disturb Marcus. She'd start the fire and begin breakfast. The children would wake gradually. Sarah first, always responsible and ready to help. Then Tommy, bursting with energy and questions. And finally Emma, quiet and thoughtful, needing a few minutes to fully wake up. Marcus would emerge from the bedroom, his hair rumpled from sleep, and the sight of him never failed to make Grace's heart skip. He'd come up behind her at the stove, ostensibly to get coffee, but really to murmur good morning close to her ear, his breath warm on her neck. It was domestic and sweet and exactly the kind of life Grace had never dared to dream about. But there were also moments of unexpected intimacy that took her breath away. Like the afternoon she was washing dishes and felt something in her hair. She reached up to find a piece of straw, "Stay still," Marcus said, coming up behind her. His large fingers were surprisingly gentle as he carefully removed the straw. Then another she hadn't felt. "You must have brushed against the hay bales when you were collecting eggs." He was standing so close. Grace could feel the solid warmth of him at her back. If she leaned back just a little, she'd be pressed against his chest. The temptation was overwhelming. "There," Marcus said, his voice rougher than usual. "All gone." But he didn't move away. Neither did Grace. They stood there, frozen in the moment, the tension between them thick enough to cut. "Grace," Marcus said, his voice low, "if you don't step away, I'm going to kiss you." Grace's pulse raced. "What if I don't want to step away?" Marcus's breath hitched, slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. He placed his hands on her shoulders and gently turned her to face him. His green eyes were dark with want, but also with tenderness. "I've been wanting to kiss you properly since our wedding day," he confessed. "Every time I look at you, I think about it, but I didn't want to rush you." "You're not rushing me," Grace said. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palm. "I've been thinking about it too." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Tell me to stop," he said. "If this is too much, tell me to stop." "Don't stop," Grace whispered. He bent his head and kissed her. Not the chaste brush of lips from their wedding day, but a real kiss. Deep and slow and thorough. Grace's knees went weak, and she gripped his shirt to stay upright. Marcus made a low sound in his throat and pulled her closer, one arm wrapping around her waist to support her. The kiss seemed to last forever, and not nearly long enough. When Marcus finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "We should probably—" Marcus started, glancing toward the open door where the children were playing outside. "Yes," Grace agreed, though she made no move to step out of his arms. "We should be sensible." "Sensible," Marcus repeated. He kissed her forehead. "I'll try to remember what that means." Grace laughed, her cheeks flushed and her lips swollen from his kiss. She'd never felt more alive. After that, they stopped trying to hide their growing affection. Marcus would drop kisses on Grace's temple while passing her in the kitchen. Grace would run her fingers through Marcus's hair when he sat at the table, the simple touch making him close his eyes in pleasure. They held hands while taking evening walks. They sat close together by the fire at night, Grace often leaning against Marcus's solid warmth while Sarah read aloud. The children noticed, of course. Tommy made exaggerated gagging noises the first time he saw Marcus kiss Grace's cheek, but he was grinning when he did it. Sarah looked pleased, like she'd orchestrated the whole thing, and Emma simply smiled her quiet smile and said, "Good. Everyone should have someone to love them." By August, there was only one pillow left between them in bed. Grace knew it was only a matter of time before it, too, was removed. She found herself both anticipating and nervous about what would happen then. Summer turned to fall. The children thrived. Sarah was reading at a level beyond her years, devouring every book Marcus could get his hands on. She discovered a love of poetry and would recite verses while doing her chores, her young voice giving life to words written by men and women long dead. Tommy was learning to help with the animals, and he'd developed a special bond with Marcus's horse, Goliath, a massive stallion who was gentle as a lamb with the boy. Marcus would lift Tommy onto Goliath's back and lead them around the pasture, and Grace would watch from the porch, her heart full at the sight of her new family. Emma, still quiet, had started to hum while she played, a sign of contentment that made Grace's heart sing, and she'd begun drawing, creating surprisingly detailed sketches of the cabin, the mountains, her family. Grace treasured each one, storing them carefully in a box under the bed. And Marcus and Grace. They were falling in love, though neither had said the words yet. It happened in small moments. Marcus bringing Grace wildflowers from the meadow, his big hands incongruously gentle with the delicate stems. "I saw these and thought of you," he'd say, his ears turning red with embarrassment. Grace mending Marcus's favorite shirt with careful stitches. Even though it was so worn, it would have been easier to make a new one. "This is the shirt you were wearing when we met," she told him. "It's special." The way Marcus's eyes followed Grace around the cabin, watching her with an expression that made her insides turn to honey. The way Grace's hand lingered when she passed Marcus his coffee, their fingers brushing in a touch that was becoming as necessary as breathing. The wall of pillows in their bed had shrunk to just one. They fell asleep each night almost touching, woke each morning tangled together, though neither acknowledged how they always seemed to end up in each other's arms by dawn. But Marcus never pushed for more. He'd given his word to let Grace set the pace, and he kept it, even though Grace could see the want in his eyes, could feel it in the tension that hummed between them whenever they were close. One night in mid-September, a thunderstorm rolled through the mountains. Grace hated storms. Had ever since she was a child. The thunder reminded her of her father's rage, the lightning of her mother's fear. She tried to be brave, tried not to let anyone see her trembling under the covers as the storm raged outside. But Marcus noticed, he always noticed. "Grace?" His voice was soft in the darkness. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Grace said, her voice only shaking a little. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her flinch, and suddenly Marcus was there, the pillow wall forgotten. He gathered her into his arms, pulling her against his chest. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe. I won't let anything hurt you." Grace buried her face against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him. Soap and leather, and something uniquely Marcus. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear. A counter-rhythm to the chaos of the storm. "Tell me about it," Marcus said. "Why does the storm frighten you?" And in the darkness, wrapped in his strength and warmth, Grace told him about her father's drinking, about how he'd rage through the house when he was in his cups, breaking things, terrifying her and her mother and her brother, about how he'd died in a flash flood during a storm when Grace was 7, and how she'd felt guilty for feeling relieved. "You were a child," Marcus said gently. "A child has a right to feel safe. If you felt relief, it was because the fear was finally over. That's not wrong, Grace. That's human." "Do you think I'm damaged?" Grace asked in a small voice. "Too damaged to be a good wife, a good mother." Marcus pulled back just enough to look at her, face in the flickering lightning. "I think you're the strongest woman I've ever met," he said. "You survived things that would have broken most people. You stayed kind despite having every reason to become hard. You chose to save 3 children you'd never met rather than protect yourself. You're not damaged, Grace. You're incredible." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I don't," Marcus said. "I just say what's true. And the truth is, I'm falling in love with you. Have been since the day you lied to Mrs. Blackwood with flour in your hair and fire in your eyes." Grace's breath caught. "Marcus, you don't have to say it back," Marcus said quickly. "I know it's only been a few months. I know this whole situation is strange. I needed you to know. I'm not just going through the motions because we're married. My feelings for you are real." "I know," Grace whispered. "Mine are too. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you chose to save those children, when you put their needs above your own safety, your own health. You could have died in the snow trying to get them to the cabin, but you did it anyway. That's when I knew you were someone special." "Then we're both fools," Marcus said, but he was smiling. "Falling in love with near strangers." "Maybe," Grace agreed, "but maybe that's exactly what we were supposed to do." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Grace melted into him. The storm raged outside, but inside, wrapped in Marcus's arms, she felt safer than she'd ever felt in her life. When the kiss ended, Grace didn't pull away. She stayed right where she was, her head on Marcus's chest, his arms around her. The last pillow barrier lay forgotten between them. "Grace," Marcus said after a while. "The pillow's still there, between us." Grace lifted her head to look at him. In the dim light, she could see the question in his eyes, the want, but also the restraint. He would wait as long as she needed. She knew that. But suddenly, Grace didn't want to wait anymore. "Then maybe we should move it," she said. It was Grace who finally broke. They'd put the children to bed early one October evening. A storm was rolling in, and the wind was already howling. Grace had made stew for dinner, and they ate in comfortable silence, watching the lightning flash through the windows. After dinner, they sat by the fire, Grace mending, and Marcus carving a wooden horse for Tommy. The domesticity of it all suddenly overwhelmed Grace. This was her life now, this cabin, this man, these children, and she was happy, truly, deeply happy in a way she'd never been before. "Marcus," she said. He looked up from his carving, his green eyes warm in the firelight. "I want to remove the last pillow." Marcus went very still. "Grace! I know what I'm saying," Grace interrupted. "I know what I'm asking for. I'm your wife. I want to be your wife in every way." Marcus set down his carving carefully. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel obligated." "I'm sure," Grace said. She stood up and walked to him, her heart pounding. "I love you, Marcus Thornton. I think I've loved you since you agreed to marry me to save 3 children you barely knew. I love your kindness and your patience and the way you answer Tommy's questions even when I know you're tired. I love the way you braid Sarah's hair, even though your big fingers struggle with it. I love the way you give Emma time to speak in her own way, and I love the way you look at me like I'm precious." Marcus stood up slowly, towering over her. "Grace," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I love you too. I loved you when you lied to Mrs. Blackwood with flour still in your hair. I loved you when you made cookies with Tommy even though he got dough everywhere. I loved you when you didn't push Emma to talk. I loved you when you learned to ride even though you were terrified. You brought light back into my life. You and those 3 children, you saved me." He cupped her face in his large, gentle hands. "Are you absolutely sure?" he asked one more time. "Kiss me," Grace whispered. "Really kiss me this time." Marcus bent down and kissed her the way he'd wanted to since their wedding day. Thoroughly, deeply, with all the pent-up longing of a man who'd been alone too long and finally found his home. Grace melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck. He was so big, so warm, so careful with her. His hands slid into her hair, and she made a small sound of pleasure that made him groan. "Bedroom," he murmured against her lips, "before I forget myself out here." They barely made it to the bedroom. Marcus kicked the door shut behind them, and Grace laughed breathlessly as he swept her up in his arms like she weighed nothing. "I've wanted you so much," he confessed, laying her gently on the bed. "Every night, lying next to you, not touching you the way I wanted to. It's been torture." "Then stop torturing yourself," Grace said, reaching for him. "I'm yours, Marcus, completely." He made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. For a man so big and strong, he was impossibly gentle, always making sure she was all right, that he wasn't hurting her. Grace had never known such care, such reverence. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, the pillow wall gone forever. Marcus stroked her hair, and Grace traced patterns on his chest. "No regrets?" Marcus asked softly. "None," Grace said. "You?" "Only that I didn't kiss you properly on our wedding day," Marcus said. Grace laughed and swatted his chest. "We barely knew each other." "I knew enough," Marcus said. "I knew you were brave and kind and exactly what this family needed." He kissed the top of her head. "What I needed." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, more married now than any ceremony could have made them. The storm that night was fierce, but inside the cabin everyone was safe and warm. Marcus woke once to check on the children and found them all sleeping peacefully. Sarah with a book on her chest, Tommy sprawled like a starfish, Emma curled up with the rag doll Grace had made her, his family, his wife sleeping in his bed, his children safe in the next room. 5 years ago, he'd thought he would die alone in these mountains, but instead, life had given him a second chance. Several second chances, actually. When spring came, Mrs. Blackwood made good on her threat and travelled all the way to the cabin to check on the children. What she found was a thriving family. The cabin had been expanded again, a real parlour added on. The garden was already planted with neat rows. Chickens scratched in the yard, and inside, Grace was teaching all 3 children their letters, while Marcus built new shelves for the growing collection of books. Mrs. Blackwood watched as Emma, shy Emma, who supposedly never spoke, read aloud in her soft voice. She watched Tommy help Marcus measure and saw wood with the careful attention of a boy who idolized his father. She watched Sarah help Grace with the bread, the 2 of them laughing over some private joke. And she watched Marcus and Grace, the way they moved around each other with the easy intimacy of a couple who'd been married for years, not months. The way Marcus's hand found the small of Grace's back when he passed her. The way Grace touched Marcus's shoulder and he turned to her with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Well," Mrs. Blackwood said stiffly, "I suppose the children are being adequately cared for." "More than adequately," Grace said, her arm around Sarah. "They're loved." After Mrs. Blackwood left, Marcus pulled Grace into his arms. "Thank you," he said, "for all of this. Thank you for giving me a family," Grace said, "for giving me a home." "This was always going to be your home," Marcus said. "From the moment you lied to save my children, I just didn't know it yet." That summer, Grace discovered she was pregnant. Marcus was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. The children were excited, especially Emma, who started talking more, telling the baby in Grace's belly stories about the cabin and the mountains. Their daughter was born in February, during another snowstorm, but this time Marcus wasn't alone. Grace was surrounded by family as she labored. Sarah held her hand, Tommy fetched water, Emma sang soft songs, and Marcus, who had been helpless when his first wife died, was able to help, to support, to be present. When their daughter entered the world with a loud, healthy cry, Marcus wept. Grace, exhausted and radiant, handed him the baby. "What should we name her?" she asked. Marcus looked at Sarah, who had made this all possible by being brave enough to keep her family together. At Tommy and Emma, who had followed a sick cowboy through a blizzard. At Grace, who had lied to save 3 children she didn't know. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." The town of Cedar Falls never quite knew what to make of the strange family on the mountain. The hermit who'd taken in 3 orphans. The baker's girl who'd married him to save them. The children who thrived against all odds. But in Silver Creek, the closer town, they became simply the Thorntons. Marcus was known as a man of his word who raised his children well. Grace was beloved for her kindness and her bread, which she sold at the general store. The children grew up strong and loved. Sarah became a teacher, educating the children of Silver Creek with the same fierce determination she'd used to save her siblings. Tommy took over the ranch, expanding it with his father's careful wisdom and his own innovations. Emma, quiet Emma, became a writer, her thoughtful observations turning into beautiful stories. And Hope, born from a marriage of convenience that became a love story, grew up knowing that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who chose to love you, who fought for you, who made you their own. Years later, when Marcus and Grace were old and grey, surrounded by grandchildren, someone asked Grace if she'd ever regretted her impulsive decision to lie to Mrs. Blackwood all those years ago. Grace looked at Marcus, still tall and strong, even in his 70s, his hand holding hers like it had for 5 decades. She looked at their children and grandchildren, the legacy of that one brave lie. "Regret it?" she said. "That lie was the truest thing I ever said. Marcus Thornton was always meant to be my husband. I just didn't know it until I said the words." Marcus raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And I didn't know I was waiting for you," he said, "until 3 half-frozen orphans led me home. It wasn't the story they'd expected, but it was the story they were meant to have. A family built not from tradition or expectation, but from courage, compassion, and the simple truth that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose."